She was just a girl with calloused hands, a tired soul, and a heart too big for her fragile frame. Her name was Layla, and every morning she woke up before the sun rose to fetch water from the well, help her ailing grandmother dress and clean, and then set off for the marketplace, where she sold baskets of handmade soap and herbs wrapped in old cloth. She never had much, but she gave freely to anyone in need. Whether it was food or time or simply a smile that lit up her face like dawn on a hilltop, Layla had nothing of her own except a quiet dream buried deep in her chest, to one day escape the dust roads and build a home where no one cried from hunger or pain. But dreams like hers rarely grew in soil so dry. One day, as she walked past the edge of the village near the old willow tree, she saw something strange. There was a man crumpled in the tall grass, his clothes torn, his skin smeared with dirt and blood, and his chest rising faintly like the breath of a dying fire. She dropped her basket and ran to him, her fingers shaking as she checked his pulse, and called out for help. But no one came, no one ever came in that forgotten corner of the world. Layla knew she had no choice, so she wrapped his broken body in her shawl, dragged him inch by inch across the fields back to her small hut, and laid him on the only bed they had, giving up her own place by the window. Her grandmother warned her not to interfere, said the man could be dangerous, said he might bring trouble. But Layla only looked into his face and whispered, "He's already seen enough trouble." For 10 lifetimes, for days, he drifted between fever and silence, his eyes opening only to wince before closing again. And Layla bathed his wounds with warm water, cleaned the blood from his face, made broth from bones and herbs, and fed it to him spoon by spoon, never asking for thanks, never needing one. When at last his eyes cleared and he spoke, it was with a voice so hoarse it sounded like gravel scraping. "Together, who are you?" he asked. She only smiled and said, "I'm someone who couldn't walk away." He told her his name was Aden, that he had been running from men who wanted him dead for reasons too dark to speak aloud. He had once been part of something powerful, something corrupt, something that hurt people until he tried to stop it. And then he became a target. Layla didn't press for details. Instead, she offered what little she had shared, stories of her childhood, how her parents had died in a flood, how she had learned to survive on strength and kindness, and how dreams kept her breathing when nothing else did. And slowly Aden healed, not just in body, but in spirit. Because in that tiny cottage filled with sunlight and wildflowers in jars, he found something he never knew he needed: hope. Layla had given up her earnings to buy medicine, had missed days in the market to care for him, had even sold her mother's necklace to pay for a doctor when his infection worsened. But she never once regretted it. She never once looked back, even when others in the village whispered about her foolishness, her recklessness, her dangerous guest. Aden began to help. Once he was strong enough, repairing the roof, mending the walls, chopping firewood. And each night as they sat beside the fire, their hands sometimes brushed and neither pulled away. It was the kind of closeness that asked for nothing but gave everything. And as the stars turned above them, Layla felt something in her heart shift. She had saved his life, and yet somehow he had started saving hers too. Until one morning the peace shattered like glass under a hammer. They came on horses with guns, shouting and demanding. And Layla stepped in front of Aden without hesitation. Shielding him with her own body, she refused to tell them anything even when they dragged her outside, and threatened her even when they tore apart her home looking for signs. And Aden, unable to bear it anymore, emerged from hiding and surrendered himself to them to stop their cruelty. They took him away, and Layla dropped to her knees, her scream echoing into the hills where no one could hear her. She had given everything, her safety, her home, her quiet life, to save him, and now he was gone. But even in her sorrow she refused to regret it, because love does not count cost, love only gives. And Layla, though broken, stood up with fire in her eyes and promised herself she would not let the world take him again, not if she had to burn everything left to get him back. The days that followed Aiden's capture were heavy like storm clouds bloated with rain, and Layla's steps dragged as though the very earth beneath her had turned to mud. She wandered through the village in silence, ignoring the stares and whispers, and returning each night to the wreckage of her home, where the roof now leaked, and the walls bore marks of boots and rifles. But none of it mattered, because she had lost the one person who had looked at her not with pity or judgment, but with something gentler, something deeper. She had not known that kind of gaze could exist, and now it haunted her like a song half-remembered. Layla refused to let despair claim her, so she set out to find where they had taken him, beginning with the towns to the north, where soldiers and lawmen patrolled the streets. She asked questions, spoke to strangers, risked her safety again and again, all for slivers of information. Most led nowhere, until an old man at a roadside tavern mentioned a convoy heading toward the city with a prisoner whose face was bruised and bloodied, and whose wrists were bound with rusted chains. She followed that thread like a lifeline, walking mile after mile, hitching rides when she could, sleeping under trees or in barns, scraping together coins to buy stale bread and tepid water. Every breath she took was for him. Every blister on her feet, every ache in her bones, every hunger pang she endured reminded her of the promise she had made to herself that she would not let the world keep them apart. When she finally reached the city, it loomed like a fortress of stone and smoke. Its gates guarded its people cold, and its air thick with the scent of industry and secrets. Layla found work in a bakery, sweeping floors and washing dishes in exchange for a corner to sleep and a crust to eat. But her real mission never wavered. By day she watched the soldiers, by night she listened in alleys and taverns, collecting stories and fragments, piecing together the puzzle of where Aden had been taken, until at last she learned of a private holding facility on the outskirts of the city, a place where the powerful kept those they wanted forgotten. Layla's heart clenched at the thought of him there, alone and hurting, but not broken. She believed in his strength, and she carried her own in the way she walked with purpose, the way she hid her fear behind calm eyes and steady hands. She befriended a guard named Tomas, who had a soft spot for wildflowers and stories of distant places, and over time he let slip enough for her to form a plan. She would sneak in during the harvest festival, when half the city would be drunk or distracted. She would wear the uniform of a servant and bring food to the prisoners, and when she found Aden, she would not leave without him. The night came, draped in smoke and celebration, and Layla moved like a shadow past firelit streets and drunken revelers, her heart pounding, her palms slick But her mind sharp, she entered through the back gates, her stolen tray of bread and broth shaking only slightly as she made her way down stone corridors, lit by flickering lamps. When she saw him through the iron bars of his cell, she almost cried. But she bit it back because she needed to be strong. His face was thinner, his eyes sunken, but they still lit up when they saw her. And that light filled her with a warmth she had not felt in weeks. He whispered her name, like it was a prayer, like it was something sacred, and she told him to be quiet, to trust her, that she had come to bring him home. She unlocked the door. With a key stolen from Thomas' heart racing as each second ticked louder in her ears. They moved quickly, slipping through the holes, ducking behind crates and barrels, hiding when footsteps echoed, and finally reaching the outer gates, where Thomas waited, his face pale, his eyes conflicted, but his hand steady as he opened the gate and told them to run. Layla grasped Aiden's hand, and together they vanished into the night, into the chaos of the city, their breaths ragged, their legs burning, but their hearts surging with the thrill of freedom. They didn't stop until the city was behind them, until the stars were their only witness, and the earth welcomed them back like old friends. They hid in a village far away where no one knew their names, where the sun rose over golden fields and the nights were quiet and kind. There Layla nursed Aiden back to full strength, and Aiden slowly rebuilt what had been broken, not just his body, but his spirit too. He began to work again, using his knowledge to help the villagers build stronger homes, cleaner wells, safer roads. He taught the children how to read and write, and he held Layla's hand every night as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance around them. He never forgot what she had done for him, and every day he showed it in 1,000 quiet ways, in the way he looked at her, in the way he listened, in the way he held her, as if letting go would shatter the world. Layla never asked for anything in return, and yet he gave her everything. He gave her a life filled with peace and laughter. He built her a house with his own hands, with wide windows and a garden filled with marigolds, and she filled it with music and warmth and light. They didn't speak often of the past, because some wounds needed silence to heal, but when they did, it was with honesty and tenderness, and the kind of trust born from fire. Layla had given everything to save him, and he had spent every moment since giving it all back with love. And in the quiet hush of dawn, as they watched the world bloom around them, they both knew that whatever storms might come, they had already found their home in each other. Asterisk. The years passed slowly and beautifully in the little village where no one asked questions, and no one cared where you had come from, as long as your hands were kind and your eyes were honest. And in that quiet world, Layla and Aiden built a life that grew like roots under the earth, deep, strong, invisible to the careless passerby, but vital and real. Layla tended to the garden with the same devotion she once gave to survival, coaxing tomatoes from cracked soil and laughter from tired souls, while Aiden became the heart of the village, offering his knowledge and strength to build not just homes, but hopes. And every time someone thanked him, he would nod with that soft smile that never left his face anymore, but his eyes would always glance toward Layla, as if to say, she is the reason I stand, she is the reason I breathe. And in return, Layla never asked him to explain the past that had nearly consumed them both. She never pried into the things that made him grow silent at night, or the moments when he would stare at the fire as if it might speak truths he could never say aloud. Because she knew that love was not a demand, it was an offering, and she had already offered everything once, so now she gave him space and warmth, and her presence, and in that quiet giving she received more than she ever dreamed until one day a letter arrived at the village sent by someone who knew of Aiden's whereabouts, who had not forgotten the man who once stood against a powerful, corrupt machine, and who now needed him again for justice, for truth, for those who had no voice. And though Aiden held the letter with trembling hands, he looked at Layla not with fear, but with sorrow, and she knew before he spoke what he was going to say. She did not beg him to stay, she did not break, she simply placed her hand on his chest and said, "Wherever you go, I will wait for you." And that night they lay in each other's arms, beneath the stars, and spoke not of goodbyes, but of beginnings, and promises of days yet to come. And when Aiden left at dawn riding toward the rising sun, Lara watched until he disappeared beyond the hills, and then she turned and went back to the garden, because she knew that waiting was not empty, it was full of love growing like the roses he had planted just for her. Aiden entered a world he thought he had left behind, a world of shadows and power and whispered names, where truths were buried beneath lies and danger waited around every corner he worked, quietly gathering allies, collecting evidence, exposing crimes and secrets that had once cost him everything. And though it was difficult, though the nights were cold, and the burden heavy, he carried on with the memory of Layla in his heart, because she had once carried him when he could not walk, and now it was his turn to carry the weight for others. And each time he felt the darkness closing in, he remembered her voice, soft but fierce, reminding him who he was, not what they made him, and he kept going until the day the truth came out like a flood, washing away years of silence and fear. And though it shook powerful men from their thrones and brought storms of retaliation, he stood firm and weathered them all because he had something no one else did. He had love waiting for him, and that gave him a strength number enemy could destroy. Back in the village, Layla lived as if each day were a poem she wrote for him. With every breath she waited, not in sorrow, but in hope, tending to their home, writing him letters she could not send, and planting wildflowers along the path. He would one day return on. The villagers came to love her as much as they did him, and she became something of a legend, the woman who had saved a man with nothing but love, and who still gave love even when she was alone. And then one day, as the rain fell soft and steady on the thatched roofs, and the wind carried the scent of earth and longing, she looked up and saw him standing at the gate, soaked but smiling, his eyes filled with tears and joy and disbelief, and she ran to him, not with words, but with open arms. And in that moment everything that had been hard and broken and lost melted away, because they were together again, and this time nothing would take that from them. Aiden dropped to his knees in the mud, not because he was weak, but because he was overwhelmed by the gravity of the life she had preserved, the home she had protected, the love she had nurtured like a flame against a storm. And he held her as if she were the answer to every prayer he had ever dared to speak. And she kissed his forehead as if to say, "You did it, you came back." And for a long time they just stood there in the rain as the village gathered slowly around them, cheering, weeping, embracing them like family, and from that day on their life became something sacred. Not in grand gestures or riches, but in the simple things, the way Aden carved her name into the wood above their door, the way Layla embroidered his initials into the quilt she wrapped him in, the way they woke each day tangled together with sunlight pouring through the windows. And every night was a celebration of their survival, their reunion, their love, and the world around them grew better. Not because they tried to change it with force, but because they lived as proof that love can heal. What the world breaks, that kindness is not weakness, that sacrifice is not loss. And soon others came to the village seeking peace and hope, and Layla welcomed them all while Aden taught them how to build from broken pieces, how to trust again, how to stand, and together they created something rare, something radiant, a place where pain was acknowledged, not ignored, where sorrow was met with song, and where every child knew the story of the girl who had once given everything to save a man. Not for reward, not for praise, but because her heart would not let her walk away, and of the man who had taken that gift and turned it into a world of love. And the story never truly ended, because it lived on in every garden they planted, in every meal they shared, in every night they sat beneath the stars' fingers entwined, breathing as one, and knowing without speaking that the greatest things in life are not the ones we take, but the ones we give, and that love, real love, is not about finding someone to complete you, but about choosing someone every day and giving them everything you are, and receiving in return a life that no storm can ever steal. Asterisk.